Hello and welcome to the 31st episode of the Stellium Astrology Podcast. Now, I'm Stephanie James, by the way, your hostess with the most S. And I am the founder of StelliumAstrology.com and of this podcast. And I also teach classes at the London School of Astrology. And I used to write horoscopes for Elle magazine. And I'm now involved in a celebrity podcasting project, which is just about to start. I think we're going to be recording a pilot episode soon, with more details to come once that has perhaps been recorded and launched. But exciting times. I won't be speaking on this podcast, which I think is a great loss for them because they're missing out on some seriously awesome podcasting. However, I will be offering my nuggets of astrological wisdom to a chart that I have no idea who the person is. So although they're celebrities, I don't know who they are. I just get their data and then I interpret what I think would be interesting, some little quirks about the chart, and then they relay it to the person, the celebrity whose chart it is. So that sounds very exciting, doesn't it? It is exciting. I'm very excited about it. So that is coming up for me pretty soon. And I've been working on a number of things lately. I've been working on some courses, some Lilith courses actually. Lilith has been kind of awakened within my astrological repertoire. I did do a few talks about Lilith a little while ago, but it seems that people want more. So I am in demand creating courses, the Lilith courses. And it's really good because I've revisited and there's just so much more to Lilith that the more I revisit her, the more I feel like I connect with what she is about. So though I haven't really focused at looking at Lilith in this podcast, I probably will at some point. I'm probably going to do an episode on Lilith. And if you don't know what Lilith is, who Lilith is, that will all be explained at a later date. But everybody has a Lilith placement. There are a number of Liliths, but we won't get bogged down because it is quite confusing and quite complex. So I will explain it at the time I record the episode, whenever I decide to do that. So actually, I just wanted to apologise because this episode is out late. And the reason it's out late is because I had to go to a funeral this week, sadly. Even though we're in a very strict lockdown, I had to go to a funeral, to my grandmother's funeral, my dear grandmother, who we all love very much. She's finally passed away at the sprightly young age of 95 years old. She is the great thing about her passing was that she passed so peacefully, and that's all you can ask for, isn't it? When you love somebody and you just want to know that they pass away in comfort and peace. So it was a sad week. But I actually saw people that I haven't seen for a very long time. Lots of my family who I haven't seen for possibly more than a year. And so it was really nice to catch up with them and to see my sister, who I haven't seen for 6 months, and my mum and my dad as well, who I haven't seen for ages. So it's just been kind of a mixed bag of emotions. It's been like a roller coaster week. And the transits this week have been totally hitting my chart like a pinball machine. So I've had the sun on my Mars, I've had Mars square my natal Mars and all of this, and there's just all this, it's just been a bit, if I could sort of describe it with a sound, I'd say, Argh! That's kind of how I've felt this week. A little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit, Argh! I don't know if that's a Jar Jar Binks sound or a Yoda sound, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down with it. Oh yeah, the other reason why it's late is because I would have come back on, when was I due to come back? On Wednesday, but it snowed heavily. I mean, in the UK, when we get heavy snow, it's not that heavy. We do sometimes get heavy snow, but it was not as heavy as the snow I've seen in the past. However, it did go on for a few days. So I ended up, sort of like it just was a bit too dangerous for me to drive, and I had to drive about 100 miles, which anybody living in the US is probably going, oh, that's nothing. Because I know that in the US, people drive a few hundred miles for a party and home again. I know about this because my ex-boyfriend, who was in a grunge band in the 90s, He told me all about the US when he stayed over there, when he lived in the US for a while. So I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but actually it's for some reason in the UK driving that kind of distance. Maybe it's the roads. I don't really know. It just didn't feel safe. And also the UK just grinds to a halt whenever there's like a bit of weird weather. If there's if there's leaves on the train tracks, the rail system collapses. And if, there's snow, then everything grinds to a halt. So that's kind of what's been happening with me. But I'm home. I got home about an hour and a half ago. I'm safe and well, and I have a hot water bottle that I'm hugging right now. And I've been desperate to get this episode recorded, just so you guys have got some more to go with, some more astro to go with. I've just got to read this to you. I just got a lovely email from Emily K, who I covered her chart in the Mercury episode. And she just wanted to say, you used my chart on your Mercury podcast episode. I discovered your podcast about a month ago and I've been listening on my morning walks and I'm almost caught up. I might have scared my neighbours, or at least some birds and squirrels, when I squealed when I heard my name. So I think that she says here as well that she identified with a lot of what I said for her. And she's found that listening to the podcast has been very helpful, and she's bought Astrology for Dummies, which I recommended, which is true, I did, which is a great book actually if you haven't got it. And she loves listening to the podcast, and thank you so much for sharing the knowledge. Now, she also said she looked on my website to see if I'd posted up the charts, and sadly I have not, because I have been waylaid. I've just got so many other little projects going on, but it really won't take me long to get those charts up. I just want to double check that I've got the right charts for the right episodes, if you know what I mean. So I'll get that sorted. It will happen. I will get those up. I hopefully will get them done really soon. And Mercury retrograde is a great time to catch up with these little jobs. So anyway, today we are talking about a big gassy ball in the sky, and I'm not talking about the sun. I'm talking about Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, who is considered to be a failed sun. Most star systems, most solar systems have two. They're usually binary systems, which means that they have two stars. So most of them do. However, our solar system only has one star. Our big gassy ball of fiery heat in the middle, the sun. But we have Jupiter, a gas giant, which happens to be pretty massive, and the gravitational pull on Jupiter is quite epic. And it is said that Jupiter was a sun that didn't quite happen. It didn't quite work. If it did work, if we did have two suns in our system, there's absolutely no way we'd be able to have life on planet Earth. So I guess it's kind of a blessing that we don't. However, Jupiter's gravitational pull is so powerful that actually all the space dust and space junk and all the little asteroids and everything that fly around and could potentially, hit our planet and cause some devastating effects, most of them get hoovered up by Jupiter, because Jupiter just seems to pull all these things into its orbit and eventually into itself. So we call Jupiter the kind of the hoover of the solar system, the planetary hoover. So I guess you could say that we're quite lucky to have him, because if we didn't have him, we would probably have ceased to exist a very long time ago. Now, he doesn't stop everything from hitting Earth. The asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, for example, obviously hit Earth and caused quite a big impact. But aside from, the odd thing that might happen to hit us, which it does every now and again, Jupiter has been a blessing for our solar system. And actually, the ancients and, a lot of mythology speaks about Jupiter being a planet of luck and of blessings. So just a little bit more about Jupiter. Jupiter kind of goes retrograde about once a year for about 4 months. And he has more than 60 satellites or moons, loads of them, and got some cool names as well. I can't remember all of them, but here's some. There's 4 large moons: Io, Europa, Ganymede and Callisto. I know there's a moon called Miranda. Oh wait, or is that a Uranus's moon? Oh gosh, don't write Miranda down in case you were taking notes. But anyway, those moons are named after Zeus's mythological lovers, and Jupiter is associated with the god Zeus. So let's have a quick look. Now, Jupiter is a social planet, and that doesn't mean necessarily that they're like, sociable. Therefore, where they are in the chart will be more sociable. However, it does describe where we have our social planets, Jupiter and Saturn, describes where we have our collective kind of, optimisms, beliefs, experiences, fears, limitations, and those kind of experiences with our social group. And by the social group, because of the speed of these planets, it's usually people who are within the sort of same age bracket as us when we go to school. So Jupiter takes about a year to transit a sign. Saturn takes about 2.5 years to transit a sign. So usually that's, people that are within the same year or a couple of years either side of us at school. So we have that kind of familiarity and understanding. Not that we don't with other people, but, there is that connection. And interestingly, that Jupiter could be associated with the people that we have in the same year at school with us. Jupiter is also a planet associated with teaching and learning. So let me just scroll. I've got a little note here. It says the final two traditional planets, so Jupiter and Saturn, that are visible to the naked eye, affect the same sort of people at the same age group at school. They represent the ongoing instincts which need to be integrated: growth and restriction, expansion and withdrawal. So where we learn to appropriately say yes and no to opportunities. So Jupiter rules Sagittarius, but it also rules by traditional assignment Pisces. So we have two mutable signs, one fire, one water, both ruled by this big gassy giant. And it'll make more sense. I think there's a lot of connections between Pisces and Sagittarius. Pisces and Sagittarius. And Jupiter is a great, when you understand those two planets and kind of what they go for, ultimately it's searching for meaning in different ways. That gives you a good insight into what Jupiter can be in the chart and in your own chart. So we could say a motto for Jupiter could be bigger is better. So, like I said, with Sagittarius and Pisces, they're both mutable, but one's water and one's fire. But also one of them is active and one of them is passive, or one is male and one is female. So Sagittarius is the active fire sign, and Pisces is the passive, feminine water sign. So Jupiter in that respect is both expressed as in an active way and a passive way, just like all the other planets seem to do. They all seem to have a double assignment. But as we all know, maybe we don't, the ruler of Pisces, the modern ruler, is Neptune. So Pisces has like two rulers, but traditional astrologers tend to look at Jupiter for both of them. I am one of those weird people that kind of, my way of doing it is I'm quite happy to do a bit of both. I don't know why. I play around with house systems, I play around with planets, and when I'm looking at a chart, I think it's my Gemini ascendant and my ability to make quick connections. I don't ever rule out that Jupiter might speak for both the houses that are occupied by Sagittarius and Pisces in the natal chart. I always look at that kind of additional layering, that kind of multifaceted thing, because I think it gives greater depth. But I would say keep it simple when you start. If you want to just keep Jupiter as Sagittarius's ruler at the beginning, I think that's a good idea. So I said that bigger is better with Sagittarius and that with Jupiter, and that generally is the rule, because Jupiter really is the planet of expansion. It's the planet of optimism. It's where we reach out further. It's where we dare to dream big. And Jupiter is, like I said, it takes 1 year to travel per zodiac sign, and it goes retrograde about 4 months a year. The glyph is, they say it's Jupiter's thunderbolt or eagle. To me, it looks like the number. It looks like the number 4, but almost like the front bit of the 4 is curved like the letter 2. So I always think of it as 24. And then I think about Jack Bauer and stuff, and I think, well, maybe he's a bit of a risk-taking, Jupiterian type. However, yes, it looks like the number 24. I think that it has something to do, the cross has something to do with the sort of planting, it's connected to the earthly realms, but I can't remember the exact meaning behind the symbolism of the glyph off the top of my head. And in mythology, Jupiter is known as Jupiter in Roman mythology, Zeus in Greek mythology, and in Greek mythology he's a serial adulterer, and he's got a wife called Hera who is kind of long-suffering and quite bitter and resentful, but who can blame her because he keeps fathering children with so many nymphs and so many people. He just cannot keep it in his pants, this guy. And then in Norse mythology, Jupiter is Thor. And I would say a really good bit of homework, I know I always talk about the Marvel films, but a really good bit of homework would be to watch Thor. Particularly some of the more, I mean, the first one's okay. More of the more recent Marvel films, I think, like Ragnarok, for example. And you've got Tom Hiddleston, who plays Loki, who is Thor's adoptive brother, who is actually an ice, I think, is it an ice giant? I always get it wrong. He's an ice giant. But Loki is a shapeshifter and he's mischievous and he's kind of Mercury, really. He's mercurial. And then you've got Thor, who is Jupiterian. He's very Jupiterian and he's very... I don't know, I just think you should watch it because you get a feel for like the dynamic between Jupiter and Mercury and the kind of mischievousness and the trickster quality of Mercury through Loki, but also the kind of the righteousness that Jupiter can portray. I'm not saying he can't also be mischievous and be a bit of a con man at times, because Jupiter can. However, I think that you get a real sense of like the purer qualities of Jupiter, or the higher vibration of Jupiter, and you get with Loki, you get kind of a lower vibration of Mercury with him. So it's an interesting one if you're interested. I've really got into Norse mythology, and I also quite like the Marvel films too. So I think it's great to see the Jupiter and Mercury played out through those kind of that through that perspective, really. So the archetype for Jupiter is the father, the teacher, the explorer, the guru, the priest. All of these are, I guess I'm being quite Jupiterian in this podcast. I guess I'm embracing I have a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Sagittarius in my 6th house of work. And while I'm doing this, because Jupiter also makes an aspect, it makes a sextile, almost an exact sextile to my Mercury. So I have a mouthpiece for Jupiter, and my mouthpiece is working right now to your earpieces, and I'm sharing my knowledge and my experiences with this rather Jupiter-Uranus subject of astrology, using my mercurial ability to speak and to convey information, make connections, and tell stories at the same time. So definitely we may see Jupiter as a father figure. We may see him as, often Jupiter can be also uncles as well in our life, you know, like our sort of like a slightly wider family, and usually the you know, like the masculine relations to our father, but definitely a teacher as well. Zeus is a teacher, Jupiter is a teacher, and you know, if you've ever had a really good teacher that really inspires you and really excites you to learn more, that's a very Jupiterian quality, a great ability to inspire people. For me, that teacher was Frank Clifford at the London School of Astrology. He's a fantastic teacher, really great storyteller, because he's a mercurial type as well. So a really great storyteller, loads of really funny anecdotes, and just such a great passion for doing what he does. So for me, I think my kind of mentor, my teacher that really spotted my gifts and encouraged me to develop them was Frank, and he's my Jupiterian teacher. And actually, very interestingly, when I had Jupiter just in my 12th house is when I signed up to the London School of Astrology, and as it crossed my ascendant, that's when I really got into astrology. Like I did a little bit of the background work, and then once Jupiter crossed my ascendant, I was absolutely larger than life and loving life. I just finally found meaning and purpose. And that's another thing Jupiter can do. Jupiter is the planet of meaning and purpose. And if it transits your ascendant, you can often find yourself doing something that, really gives your life a sense of meaning and a real sense of, sometimes a sense of direction, because once you've found the meaning in life, you suddenly know where you need to go. So if anybody's really not sure about where they're supposed to be in life, it's worth looking at your Jupiter placement. It's one of the great things when you're looking to do something more. Some people are constantly longing for something more. I know I was. I know that back in 2020, I was starting to get really sick of life. I was getting really sick of my job. And back in sort of 2010, 2011, I was just like, there's got to be more. And I'd been really getting into working with the moon phases and things like that. And then when I signed up to astrology classes with Mary English in Bath, and I also signed up to the LSA with Frank Clifford, that's when everything just sort of came together for me. And once it all came together, I still didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I wanted to do astrology. And that's the thing. I think that kind of direction that you get, it doesn't necessarily mean that it shows you exactly where you're going, but it puts you on the right path sometimes, that sense of meaning and that sense of understanding. And it helps you to see. Jupiter is like putting on these magic glasses where you can suddenly see very, very far ahead. You don't see the obstacles that might hold you back. You just see the potential of where you could be and almost the pathway of how to get there. So these magical glasses that Jupiter gives you can be incredibly powerful, but you do also have to exercise an element of Saturnian practicality, the other social planet, to help you to understand what it is you need to do in order to get there in a practical way. Because sometimes you can have this very larger than life, overblown idea of what you want to do, and then if you don't have all the practical skills and tools, then you might just find yourself investing a lot of time and energy into something that just falls flat. So there's a balance between these planets, these social planets, but Jupiter is definitely the fuel we need in order to give us hope. And that's another thing with Jupiter, it's the planet of hope. So the colour for Jupiter is royal blue or purple, lovely rich royal blue. And it is quite a royal or regal planet as such. I wouldn't say it's as royal as you might have the royal family. I think Leo is very royal, and so is Capricorn in a sense, not necessarily the lavishness of royalty, but the sense of duty. But Jupiter, there is a sense of, there can be pompousness, but there can also be this ability to, I always say with Sagittarius, they kind of attract an entourage. And I think that that's the case with Jupiter. I think it can be a planet that attracts an entourage in a sense. The metal for Jupiter is tin. The part of the body that is ruled are the liver. So anybody who's ever known anybody who's got a bit of a drinking problem, there's a condition, I think it's called cirrhosis of the liver. And it's where you drink so much that your liver enlarges. And it's interesting to think that Jupiter enlarges things and the liver can actually enlarge with heavy alcohol abuse. But the liver can also repair itself as well, which is an interesting thing. The thighs are also ruled by Jupiter. I have Jupiter in my 6th house, which is a kind of health house, a health and sort of a bodily house, really. It's an earthy house. And I have I would call them quite Sagittarian thighs. They're kind of chunky. And yes, Jupiter also rules growths. So, malignant and benign growths can be included in this. It's where the body just keeps on growing and growing. So, if you do get kind of like a tumour or something, it's where the body doesn't have the information to tell it to stop. Anything where there's enlargement and potentially obesity. So you might think, oh, I'd like to have a breast enlargement. You may well be having a Jupiter transit to your moon, not necessarily. Also with a Jupiter transit to the moon, you have to be very careful that you don't eat anything and everything in sight, because Jupiter, being that bigger is better, larger than life planet that likes to blow things out of proportion and likes to just get on board, doesn't seem to have an off button. There's no limit. There is no limit. The sky is the limit. Oh, I saw my niece, and she's really got into Toy Story. I saw her over the past week when I was down, and she's really into Buzz Lightyear. She couldn't say it properly. To infinity and beyond. And that's so Buzz Lightyear, to infinity and beyond. It's so Jupiterian. But again, I had Jupiter to my moon a few years ago, and when I saw that approaching, I decided I'm going to join Slimming World, because I know if I don't join Slimming World, it could get really out of hand. So what I did, instead of overindulging, which is what happens sometimes with Jupiter to the moon, we can overindulge, eat too much food. I decided to educate myself on how not to do the things that I was dreading that I would do. So when I had Jupiter to my moon, I used it in the correct way. I thought, right, sign up now, because otherwise this Jupiter to the moon transit could really blow me up a bit. Actually educated myself, and I slimmed down instead. So you can work with it. It's not a sentence. If you do find that you're going to have Jupiter transit, a certain aspect of your chart, and you're concerned about potentially, you might put on weight or something else. Jupiter to my moon was really, really great, because I got to educate myself on healthy eating and managing to not overeat and, eating the right things and exercising. And I also, at the same time, was inspired to learn about myself on my more personal inner level. And I started looking around for counselling courses and found them. So it's a great time for whatever Jupiter touches in your chart. It really helps you to learn about yourself. It's an opportunity to gain deeper understanding. And like I said before, as a humanistic astrologer who believes in freedom of choice, I don't believe that astrology is so fatalistic that if you're having a transit, you're destined to, okay, Jupiter to my moon, I'm destined to put on 5 stone. I didn't want to do that, so I took matters into my own hand, and so can you. It's not fatalistic. We can change things. There are non-negotiable transits, but what we can negotiate is the way that we handle them, what our reactions to them. So the key role for Jupiter is expansion, belief, and grace. Jupiter is literally like a magnifying glass. Everything it touches in the natal chart, it puts it literally in, it magnifies it, it grows. So if you have any planets in conjunction with Jupiter, they're going to blow those planets out of proportion. Now, the ruler of my stellium is Uranus, and Uranus is in conjunction with Jupiter. It's about 5 or 6 degrees apart. It's not a tight conjunction. It's still there though. It's still within 8 degrees, which is what we consider a conjunction orbit to be, or as we would say, 8 degrees orb. Yes, so my stellium is already being impacted with Jupiter by aspect, but it's also the ruler of my stellium is being blown out of proportion by Jupiter, which means that I probably do seem to be perceived as a bit of a larger than life character, not really a shrinking violet. And I know that some people really think of me as a bit of a just a bit out there, I've always got something to say. I used to be a bit of a party animal, a bit of a wild child. But those days are gone. I'm not that wild anymore, believe me. I've definitely calmed down, but I'm still, as my mum described me this week, she said, well, you're very noticeable whether you're in the room or if you're not. It's your absence can be noticed. So I kind of take that as kind of a compliment, but at the same time, I kind of feel like I've got to educate myself a bit on, I don't know, I don't want to change the way I am completely, but I don't necessarily want to be somebody who's just an overbearing personality. Hopefully she didn't mean that. So we kind of covered that about Jupiter. And Jupiter is also incredibly lucky. Like I said, we're lucky to have Jupiter in our solar system, hoovering up all those asteroids for us and keeping us relatively safe, like a giant magnet almost, pulling everything in. And, he's a buoyant planet as well. So it's like that hot air that rises, that kind of lifting feeling. There is a nice sense of lift with Jupiter. So Jupiter does also tend to rule anything that involves not being grounded. So flying and birds and kind of being not necessarily airborne as such. When there was a Jupiter, I think Jupiter, Uranus and the moon in conjunction at one point, I can't remember what sign it was in now, we had the moon, the mission to the moon, where we had the moon landing. That was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, Jupiter being the planet of limitlessness and Uranus being the complete, this technology and kind of extraterrestrial almost. Uranus is out there, it's the god of, they're both gods of the skies as well, Jupiter and Uranus, and Uranus kind of takes things beyond. So Jupiter can be, it can take us into air flight and it can take us to limitlessness, and then you've got Uranus as well, which is kind of it just takes us that next level beyond as well. So those two planets together, freedom-loving planets as well. Jupiter is a very freedom-loving planet. It's a lovely planet to have in the chart. It's called the Great Benefic. So Venus was the lesser benefic, and Jupiter is the greater benefic. Obviously, really lovely planets to have, but don't just assume that because they're considered to be a great benefic. In the same way, we might have a planet that's exalted. Don't necessarily assume that means that it's going to be, the person's going to turn out great no matter what. People have flaws, and these things can sometimes work against us. I had a friend before who, oh dear, hiccup. I had a friend before who had a Jupiter-Venus conjunction in Pisces, and Venus, I think, is exalted in Pisces, and Jupiter is in rulership traditionally in Pisces, and they were together by conjunction, and you'd think, wow, that's lovely, what a beautiful conjunction. But it just kind of blew their lack of ability to deal with reality out of proportion. So they were they weren't incredibly practical. They didn't have a lot of practical skills, and they've constantly found themselves falling back onto other people to help them, because they'd get themselves in situations where they just needed a lot of help. They didn't really understand finances. They weren't very good at holding down a job. And, they had things like, they had Mars in Capricorn, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. You'd go, oh, wow, that's a really great placement for Mars. But actually, it unfortunately kind of worked against them, because they were so dreamy and so disconnected from earthliness that they just weren't able to sort of like deal with the earthly day-to-days of life. But they're incredibly talented musically, poetically, artistically. They were so fantastically talented, and they had all those skills. So they needed somebody really kind of like, they kind of just needed a manager who could help them to deal with all the other sides of life. So yeah, don't ever just assume that planets are exalted, if you've ever heard of that, and maybe I'll go over that in a different show. But if something's exalted, or if they're in rulership and they're supposed to be operating better, or the fact that they had the lesser and the greater benefic together in their chart, just because they're called the benefics doesn't mean that they're always going to be operating on this amazing level and channeled into the most productive way, because they might not be. And that's the thing, Jupiter is where we might have faith in something, we might find a belief system, we might believe in ourselves more, we might be able to visualise and be creative. But on the other side of that, Jupiter can be where we are incredibly impractical, and maybe are believe things in a way that we're just more gullible, and we don't have that ability to be as practical as we should. I can see here, I've written down here, at best, Jupiter is optimistic, generous, jovial, expansive outlook, faith, openness to grace, desire for improvement, and wise. But at worst, they can be extreme. So you can have extremism, the belief system that just takes it to that one step too far. Wasteful, provocative, overlooks details, overconfidence, pompousness, laziness, overextending the self, and hypocritical. I know a few Jupiterian types are incredibly hypocritical. and incredibly lazy. Venus as a lesser benefic can have those kind of abilities too, to make you quite lazy. The thing with Jupiter, there does come confidence. I think the optimism and the confidence kind of come hand in hand almost. I'll tell you what else I saw was an article about people being late all the time, and if you're more likely to be late if you're an optimistic person. And apparently they said that, people that are, pessimistic, anxious, tend to be on time more, whereas the optimistic ones tend to be, they think, oh, I'll be all right, I'll get ready in a minute, yeah, I have plenty of time, and then they suddenly realise they've got 5 minutes to get ready and be somewhere. And I think that's very Jupiterian as well, that kind of sense of just believing everything's okay and it'll all just fall into place. So, like every planet, there's, the better, the them at their best and them at their worst. And Jupiter, sometimes we might look at the chart and go, oh, it's going to be an incredibly lucky transit, you're going to have all of this wonderful stuff happen to you. But it may also be a time where you find yourself, when we say we're searching for meaning or, searching for that connection with God, which Jupiter gives us, it can do anyway, it might be a time when we're actually having one-to-one conversations with God, asking God for help, asking for, support from wherever. And I know when I nearly lost my mum, when she had pneumonia back in 2012, she was in the hospital, and I was studying astrology at that time. And at that time I was like, well, I don't know what I believed in. I still don't really know what I believe in. I'm agnostic, really. I'm kind of a spiritual person, but I was in the hospital when she was on basically what was presenting itself as her deathbed. And I was sitting there next to the bed just praying. And I was like, who am I praying to? I put my hands together and go, please, please, please save my mum. I will do anything, please. And just praying to God. And this is when I had that. This is when I joined the LSA and I had Jupiter transiting my 12th to my first house. And, just having these moments where I was having these conversations with God. And around that time as well, that's really interesting, is I bought my mum scratch cards to keep her entertained while she was in bed in hospital. She was really struggling to breathe, and it was really horrible to seeing her suffer. But at the same time, I'm somebody as well who's not really good when I'm going into the hospital. She'd have a little bedside table and I'd just be constantly tidying it up for her, and she'd be like, why are you tidying it? I can't find what I need, but it was the only thing I could do. I didn't know what else to do. But I got her these little scratch cards, and she just kept winning money on them. And I swear that's the Jupiter thing. It was just like, no matter what, I spent £5 on a scratch card and she won £5. I was like, well, you have to reinvest it. You have to go and get another scratch card now. And she just kept winning money on these scratch cards. Not loads, just a little bit. But it was just really funny that it was like, I was having this Jupiter transit and I kept buying her scratch cards, and every card I got her was a winner, even if it was a small amount of money. That was just a little tidbit, as I am full of them. So other keywords for Jupiter that we can just touch on very quickly. So we've got education, like I said, exaggeration. Oh my gosh. I heard this from an astrologer called Melanie Reinhardt, and she's a Chiron expert. And she called Sagittarius Exaggitarius, and she nicked that from another astrologer called Rick Levine. Now, Exaggitarius is such a great kind of word combo, because it really describes them so much. Living with a Sagittarius, it's just ridiculous how much they exaggerate over absolutely everything. I know I exaggerate sometimes too. Like I said, I've got a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, but nothing like, I never exaggerate in a million years like my boyfriend does. So what else? Yes, so exaggeration, excess, expansiveness, extravagance, faith, fortune, future. Maybe if you go to see a fortune teller, it might be Jupiterian time for you. Gambling, generosity. Gambling, definitely. That's a very Sagittarian quality as well. But there is a sense with Jupiter where we do gamble, where we take a leap of faith. There's a game that my boyfriend plays called Assassin's Creed, and there's this bit in the game every single time. It's so ridiculous. I used to play this game too. We have to jump off the top of a building into a hay bale. It's part of the challenge, and it's like, you've got to do the leap of faith. And it's like, so this is my almost autistic Capricorn eyes watching this. And I always go, if he landed in a hay bale from the top of that building, he would definitely be dead. There's no way he'd survive that. And my boyfriend gets really annoyed and says, you don't have to take it seriously. It's a computer game. I just think, I can't. Oh gosh, I watch things with practical eyes. It's quite annoying. Everything. I watched films and I criticise them for not being realistic enough. But, that's escapism for you. It's not supposed to be realistic. I had a, speaking of kind of like, future is like fortune and future and faith. One of the people that submitted their chart to this podcast, who happens to be a client of mine, Sammy. Sammy actually, when she booked in with me, she said, I just was wondering if you could just give me like a 10-year view of the future. And I was like, oh, I don't really do that. I don't really do 10 years. Generally, I kind of do like the coming year. And, sometimes I look a little bit further ahead, but I don't tend to go too far ahead into the future. And she went, oh, that's okay. It's just I saw an astrologer before who did that for me, and I thought it was quite good. And I was like, oh, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, we can definitely have a look and see what's coming up. And if I see anything kind of major, I'll have a look for you. And when I cast her chart, she had Jupiter rising, and I was like, that makes sense. She really wanted to know about the bigger picture. She wanted to know long into the future, and that's quite Jupiterian. It's very Jupiterian for people to kind of, if you're having a Jupiter transit, you do start thinking about the future. You plan ahead. You can see for years. You can see for miles. So in the same way that Sagittarius might be the sign where you, expand your mind, and you, expanding your mind could be taking things like LSD or, mind-altering drugs. Expanding your horizons, which is something that Sagittarius does, can be not just about travelling abroad and experiencing new cultures and doing new things, but it can also be about, expanding yourself in an educational sense, in a higher education sense. People that who graduate with a degree these days, suddenly the world opens up for them in a different way. In the same way, passing your driving test, suddenly the world opens up for you. You are able to travel all over the country. You can drive from A to B. You don't need to rely on somebody else, and you can jump in a car whenever you want and do that. So there's a sense of freedom and expansiveness about Jupiter. Optimism, as I've said, opulence, lawlessness. Yes, now lawlessness can be a bit of a Jupiterian quality. I do tend to think of Jupiter as a bit of, Sagittarius is the centaur, and if you see Jupiter, I can't help but feel that it's a bit of a Wild West cowboy, especially if you've got Mars and Jupiter in conjunction. You get a bit of a cowboy quality. Very philosophical. There's the Olympics is connected to Jupiter. Big sports games and things like that. Jupiter is a sporting planet. Positive conscience, like I said before, religion as well. Somebody seeking more meaning. The self-improvement aspect, I think that kind of goes with like the higher education aspect, and study as well, of course. I think the Open University must be quite a Jupiterian institution. I've not looked at it actually, but that might be an interesting one. Travel, like I said, truth as well. Sometimes the truth can be bent with Jupiter. Wealth and wisdom as well. So that's a lot of keywords with Jupiter. Now, what have I got here? So I have some quotes actually. Hang on, let me just enlarge my screen. Where are you? Quotes. Oh, here they are. So we have got to expand the horizons of your utmost destiny, you have to venture beyond the confines of fear, doubt, and negativity. That is so Jupiterian. That's almost a Jupiter over Saturn kind of quote. To expand the horizons of your utmost destiny, you have to venture beyond the confines of fear, doubt, and negativity. Those three words are so Saturnian, and Jupiter and Saturn do have an interplay together, which you'll hear in the next episode as well about Saturn. So it's interesting that, you know, you can find quotes where you do have to think, you know, that Jupiter, you could almost say that Jupiter is the comfort zone. Jupiter is stepping outside of the comfort zone if you dare to dream. He who dares, Rodney. There's me quoting Only Fools and Horses again. He who dares. And what's this? What other ones are there? Here's another quote. What's it from? The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. And I couldn't make of her for that dream. It was my dream too, and Indian boys weren't supposed to dream like that. And white girls from small towns weren't supposed to dream big either. We were supposed to be happy with our limitations, but there was no way Penelope and I were going to sit still. Nope. We both wanted to fly. That is talking about limitation is very Saturnian, and then you've got this Jupiterian refusal. They just both want to fly. And here's another one. The purpose of empowerment is to urge you towards freedom, Jupiterian word, to help each of you break free of all limitations, limitation being Saturn. It is that freedom that will give you the eternal happiness and finally connect with the unconditional realisation of truth. Steve Maraboli, Life, the Truth and Being Free. So there you go. That's another great Jupiterian quote. Now, let's have a quick look. I did have... Now, Emma Lee, who I actually read her email at the beginning, she just happens to have Jupiter rising. So I thought I would just look at her chart. Not because she emailed me, but of course it was lovely to get the feedback. But actually, Emma, your chart really did jump out at me. So you have got Sun in Virgo in the 12th house, Uranus at 3 Libra in the 12th, and Jupiter at 12 Libra. You've almost got a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and perhaps we could say that because Jupiter is a big, expansive planet in the solar system, actually we could say that, you know, astrologically speaking, that is a conjunction. It's a bit wide. It's about, what's that? Is that a bit about 9 degrees? But because it's Jupiter, you could rope that in. Actually, 3 is nearly at 2. Uranus is at 3 degrees and 53 minutes of arc in Libra, and your Jupiter is at 12 degrees and 1 minute of arc. So yes, you have actually got a very wide Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, as I was speaking about Jupiter-Uranus. And those are your very, ultra quirky types. In Libra, maybe not so quirky as in maybe Sag or in Aquarius or something like that. I think that anyone who's got Uranus in Libra is definitely going to be open-minded to more unconventional relationships. And you've got your ascendant at 13 degrees Libra as well. So that means that Jupiter rising, it's like having those futuristic glasses on that I was talking about before, that you look through those futuristic... It's those glasses that allow you to see really, really far ahead in the future. Don't know if you've ever seen that film They Live, which has got Roddy Piper in it, and it's is it John Carpenter? Who's the guy that writes all those horror films, the B movies? John Carpenter, I think it is. I think he did The Thing as well. But anyway, They Live. They put on these Ray-Bans and they can suddenly see aliens everywhere. Actually, that might be quite a good description of Jupiter rising in Libra, but with Uranus in conjunction as well. So you've got Uranus, Jupiter, and then actually at 14 you've got Mercury retrograde as well. So it's quite funny. So you've got those 3 planets, which are very intellectual, very cognitive, and in Libra it's very pleasant. It's extremely pleasant, but like I said already, you've got that unconventional flavour from Uranus, and looking through those glasses, you might well suddenly feel like a bit of an alien looking around you. That sort of Uranus placement there, it can be a sense of never really quite fitting in, even though you're probably quite accepted by people, because having a nice Libra rising and being quite, your chart ruler Venus is in the 11th house as well, so it's quite a friendly social aspect. Lots of people probably, lots of friends, I'd imagine. But yeah, having that Jupiter, Uranus and Mercury rising, you probably think of the world in a bit of a weird way, and people don't. You might keep that to yourself as well. That might be something that, you don't really share with other people, but actually there's a sense of a sense of unconventionality about the way you see the world. But Jupiter also really is a very lucky and optimistic planet as well. So you may find yourself in the sense that, some people consider themselves to be quite lucky people. I know my best friend who's done a lot of travelling and has had some really great jobs. She always calls herself very lucky. She always thinks of herself as very lucky. And I know a few people that just think, yep, I'm a lucky person. I get this and I get that. And it's great. Now, whether you do or you don't, because you've got that Moon, Mars in Capricorn, Moon in Capricorn and Mars in Sagittarius, you may not necessarily, I think that can be a challenging combination, Moon, Mars. However, I see that you've got, with this Jupiter rising, that's probably such a strong placement for Jupiter that you probably do often lean towards the positive rather than the negative, and do have quite an optimistic and outgoing kind of personality that's very, very likeable. You may be quite sporty as well, or maybe when you were younger, you may have been quite sporty. When they talk about the 12th house really being kind of your delivery into the world as well, when you've been born, Uranus rising usually describes a sense of speed, or maybe there was an unexpected circumstance, and maybe there was some kind of cesarean that occurred. But with Jupiter there as well, we might think about, it could have been that there was a bit of a stressful situation around when you were born, possibly, and people were saying prayers maybe. Or it could have been that, that there was a shock or a scare, and suddenly everything was okay, and it was just like an elation. So I don't know if you've ever heard the story about when you were born, but that might be an interesting one to discuss. And yes, just going back to that unconventionality and being quite original and probably quite comfortable in your own company, even though Libra does love to be with other people as well, and they do have that very nice social aspect to them, as does the Jupiter rising. You do have Saturn in your 7th house, if we're looking through the equal house system. So you may have things have to get quite serious for you, maybe, for you to really want to commit, perhaps. And when you do commit, you're in for the long haul, because it's not just Saturn in the 7th, it's Saturn in Taurus in the 7th. So that's very committed, a long-term kind of outlook. So thank you for your chart, Emily. Who else did I have that I was going to look at? I was going to have a quick look very quickly at art. Who else did I have? I think that's it, yeah. So art has got Jupiter in Cancer on the midheaven. It's a bit, it's a bit wide for the midheaven, but it's in the 9th house. So Jupiter, it's kind of at home in the 9th house, because the 9th house is ruled by Sagittarius, and Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. And Jupiter in Cancer, I think quite elevated, quite high. There could be a sense of, I would say, longing for home, or kind of a sense of patriotism, but it may be that you find yourself living somewhere that may be different to the place that you were born, and it could be that that there's a sense of faith in the homeland to an extent, or a belief in. I know some people who have travelled to other countries, and they get very bogged down with the political systems. I worked with a guy who he got very involved in British politics, and then the whole Brexit thing happened, and he was like, oh, everybody wants me to leave, and because he was from America, and he was here on a German passport, and the whole Brexit thing kind of like stirred him into being quite, not necessarily patriotic about his own country, but maybe the sense of patriotism for being in the UK. But either way, Jupiter in Cancer. Cancer is quite patriotic anyway, but there's a sense of wanting to belong somewhere. And when it's in the 9th house, Jupiter in Cancer in the 9th house, it may be that you're searching for that place where you want to belong. And maybe you've not really found that, because, quite low in your chart, you've got Uranus and Neptune kind of hanging around the lowest part, the IC. And that can be a kind of a home that never really felt like you were able to grow some roots. And maybe your home was always moving around, or it could be that maybe there was more of a community aspect to your home. It could be that perhaps when you were growing up, it was more like there were lots of people coming in and out, and it didn't really feel like a place you could settle. So it could be that, your Jupiter placement in your chart describes a real sense of searching for a belonging. And, with it in the 9th house as well, it could be that you're looking to find that sense of belonging in different countries, or it could be that you are leaning towards religious or spiritual kind of ideals, and finding that belonging and that sense of home you find within yourself. Perhaps. It would be interesting to know what you think. You are also a Pisces sun, so the Jupiterian message is carried through your sun as well, because you've got this, sun in Pisces, which is traditionally ruled by Jupiter, and then that puts that Jupiter placement on your midheaven. It feels quite important. Well, not really, it's not the midheaven, but it's quite high up in the chart. There does seem to be a sense of importance about that placement of Jupiter now. And especially also with the Neptune placement being down there on the IC, it's this kind of, there's a sort of like an echoed message here about the home life, the roots, the ancestry, perhaps the confusion of where you came from. Is it possible that you don't really know, sometimes you don't know your birth story properly, or you don't really know your family, or there might be some sort of, not a disguise, but there's not, the truth isn't always there, perhaps. But there's the connection to the past is a little bit cloudy, and that the Uranian thing as well. Like there's a sense of Uranus in Capricorn down there as well. There's a real sense that there's the structure. There was no real structure for you, and you're searching for the sense of belonging, and maybe not the structure, but the sense of finding yourself, maybe. Through travel, through experiences, through learning, and maybe ultimately through a connection with some kind of God. So that would be interesting for me to hear your story. And I know you emailed me as well, Art, actually got in touch just to say that you'd been checking out the podcast too. So I did really want to get round to your chart. And look, you've got your moon in Aries as well, which is a very different energy to your sun in Pisces. It's a very creative placement you've got for your sun there in the 5th house, but it's right on the cusp of the 6th as well. So there's a sense of that it's kind of, the sun is working. There's a good work ethic there. There's a good work ethic. I can see that you're quite a hard-working person, and you do need to do things maybe where you're helping other people, maybe a selfless kind of position. And then you've got your moon just sitting around the descendant. It's actually on the descendant. So relationships and working with other people, helping them in some way, maybe empowering other people to be stronger, inspiring them to do better in their lives, caring for others in some way. Perhaps that's going to help to sort of build that sense of belonging for you, and that sense, satisfy that caring aspect of Cancer as well for you. That kind of natural nourisher that you have. It's almost quite we all know that Cancer is a maternal, feminine sign of caring, but actually, I think that there's a sense of, caring doesn't have to be a motherly, womanly thing, but there is a carer described by your chart. I can see that there's some kind of care work, or there's the niche finder as well. So there's also with Cancer, people that just know what needs to be done when it needs to be done. I'd be interested to hear about your chart and your story. If you can feedback and let me know about whether or not you do have a sense of belonging. Maybe I've barked up the wrong tree on that one. And you also have Libra rising as well, so that puts your Venus placement in Capricorn also is quite important. And you've been having quite a heavy Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto transit over the past few years. Jupiter since December, when did it go into Capricorn? I think, was it in Capricorn in, oh gosh. Well, it's only just come out really, hasn't it? So it was only over the past year, or a bit more than a year, that you've had Jupiter going through all your planets in your 4th house and everything as well. So that transit may have really helped you to explore yourself and really helped to provide some clarity and give you the tools to have a look within and really learn and maybe accept yourself a bit more. And now we've got Jupiter in Aquarius, and that is going to be moving through, and you're going to be having that enter your 5th house soon. So this could be a great time to express yourself in a creative way, and find your voice by the time it gets to 23 of Aquarius, which is where your Mercury is. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So thanks to everybody for submitting your charts. If I haven't read your chart yet on the show, I do apologise. I will get round to it. And I also promise I will get the episodes up, the blog post pages as well. I'm sorry, I'm so rubbish and so slow at it, but it's just so hard doing all of this stuff. I'm juggling a lot, you see. That Gemini ascendant's juggling a lot, and I will get round to it, I promise. Now, I also have got a couple of celebrity charts for you to look at. I won't go into it in too much detail. So here's one. I also had a really crap internet connection at the beginning of doing this. So I've picked out Mila Kunis, and this is one that I'm not going to recommend from astro.com, purely because I couldn't find her on astro.com. I don't know where this birth time has come from her. I have no idea how credible it is. But according to the birth time that there is for her, she has Jupiter rising. She has Jupiter-Uranus rising in Sagittarius. And she's a Sun Leo. She's got Mars in Leo. She's got Venus and Mercury in Virgo. And she has Libra on the midheaven. I happen to think Mila Kunis is an incredibly beautiful woman. I cannot, when she's on the screen, I can't take my eyes off her. But what was interesting about Mila Kunis is that she was in a film. Where's my page? She was in a film called Jupiter Ascending. So I think it's interesting that she happened to be cast in a film as a character called Jupiter in a film called Jupiter Ascending, and she happens to, by the birth time that we have available for her, her Jupiter placement is quite prominent. And by prominent, I mean it's angular. It's either on the ascendant or descendant or midheaven or IC. That usually is a prominent placement. But, a planet can also be prominently placed if it happens to be in conjunction with the sun somewhere or with the moon. That would make a planet more prominent. I did get a question about that. I can't remember who asked me now. I think it might have been Cara. Cara, I think it was you that asked me about prominence in the birth chart. I might do an episode on that at a later date, but hopefully that should be enough of an explanation for now. We will get into the houses as well at some point. But yes, so she was also in Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and obviously we know that she played Meg in Family Guy. She did the voice for Meg in Family Guy as well for many years. And she's now married to Ashton Kutcher, and they've got a family together. But here we go. Here's the synopsis. Jupiter Jones, which is Mila Kunis, is an unsuspecting, unlucky Earth-born janitor whose genetic structure marks her as royalty and heir to the Earth. Now, how funny that we were talking about Jupiter being... There is a kind of royalty about Jupiter, and it's also a lucky kind of planet as well. So she's this unsuspecting, unlucky person who suddenly finds out that she is royalty and she's going to inherit the Earth, where she's working as a janitor. Jupiter was king of the gods and in astrology is linked to royalty. So was she born to play Jupiter? Possibly. I mean, we don't know if her time is accurate, and I'll be much happier if I knew roughly how accurate her time was. Anybody who wants to know Mila Kunis, I'm looking on Astro Theme, and it says that she was born on the 14th of August 1983 at 5 p.m. in Chernivtsi in Ukraine. I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. I'm sure I didn't. I wish I could pronounce everything right always, all of the time. So anyway, Mila Kunis is married to Ashton Kutcher. Now, Ashton Kutcher, we have a C rating for Ashton Kutcher. So still, again, not totally trustworthy, but he has Jupiter in the first house in Gemini. And he's got a lot of Aquarius as well. He's got Stellium in Aquarius, which I didn't know before. But again, we don't know that his birth time is totally accurate. But he's got Sun, Moon, Mercury and Venus in Aquarius, and the Sun and Moon in conjunction. So he was born on a new moon, and that's on his midheaven based on his birth time that we've got here, which we don't know if it's accurate. 7th of February 1978 at 12:30 p.m. in Cedar Rapids in Iowa. But yes, he's got Jupiter in the first house in Gemini, according to his birth time that we have for him. And I don't know loads about Ashton Kutcher. I know he was in a film called The Butterfly Effect. He was in that 70s show where he worked with Mila Kunis, and that's where they met originally. And he's done a lot of films and a lot of TV. I think did he do Punk'd as well? The show where they do pranks on each other. Is it any surprise that somebody with a Gemini rising would be in a show where you play tricks on people? So he's got Jupiter rising as well. And I think with people with Jupiter rising, there is a larger than life sense of personality about them. And I saw him on a programme called, has anybody seen Hot Wings? Oh no, it's called Hot Ones, where they eat chicken wings, and they start off it starts off hot and it gets hotter and hotter until they get to a Scoville scale, which is just beyond comprehension for me. Like they get to like ghost chili level and stuff like that. Billie Eilish went on it and she was hilarious. She was honestly hilarious. Paul Rudd was on it and he was great as well. Ashton Kutcher was on it. And like, Ashton kind of struck me. I didn't realise it when I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is a surprise to me. He struck me as quite a jock, actually. He was on there with a baseball cap and I thought of him, I could see him at school being in the American football team and just being like one of those guys that's just a little bit like, yeah, I like sports. Yeah, I've got a hot girlfriend. That kind of guy, I think I've seen too much of Ashton Kutcher playing kind of a sensitive person. And I just didn't get that vibe from him when he was on Hot Ones. He was just very extremely confident and, dare I say it, a little bit arrogant, maybe a little bit pompous I got, which, Jupiter rising, there can be some pomposity, there can be a little bit of arrogance maybe, or that overconfidence as we were talking about. I like Ashton Kutcher in a lot of things, but I got that sense from him. He's also, I think he invests in businesses, like I think maybe IT businesses, I'm not entirely sure. I remember him talking about it on Hot Ones and thinking, oh, so he's an entrepreneur as well. Like he's an investor, he's a risk taker. Because being entrepreneurial, you do have to take risks sometimes. That's the nature of doing that kind of thing. You have to take risks in order to, make money. It's that leap of faith. So I thought it was interesting that we've got Ashton Kutcher there. He also played a character in 2.5 Men, didn't he? He took over from Charlie Sheen. Now, I haven't got his birth chart up in front of me. Just let me see if I can get it quickly, because I didn't call up all the charts I wanted to because my internet connection was really rubbish earlier. So the little spinning wheel of death is going round. Oh, there we go. Now we have an A rating birth time, but we also have an alternative birth time for Charlie Sheen, who was also in 2.5 Men. And the first birth time we have for him is 3rd of September 1965 at 22:48. So that's 10:48 p.m. born in New York, New York. And it says here that his Jupiter is in Gemini, just like Ashton Kutcher, and he has Gemini rising. And I think I can't quite make it out. Ascendant at 1 Gemini. There's another birth time for him, which is 4 Gemini rising. So instead of 10:48, it's 10:58, so 10 minutes later. But he has the A rating that we've got puts him at 157 rising in Gemini, and that gives him a Jupiter in the first house by equal. He's got Jupiter in the first house, and it's just interesting that him and Ashton Kutcher both have that Jupiter rising in Gemini. And there's a Jupiter in Gemini. They tend to attract people who are, they want to hear what they've got to say. And Gemini can be known for like juggling things, like perhaps, juggling relationships. Geminis have been known to kind of be a little bit fickle. I'm not trying to generalise with Gemini. What I'm trying to say is they can juggle more than one thing and they're not very committal. They love a bit of freedom. So it's interesting the characters that they played. But also what's interesting is Charlie Sheen also has a Sagittarius moon in quite late degrees. And he has a Sun, Pluto, Uranus conjunction, which you might say that really is a combination for somebody who, Jupiter opposite the moon, so Jupiter in Gemini opposite moon in Sagittarius, that's going to be somebody who probably is a bit of a party animal. The off button doesn't always work, and they're very sociable. And then you've got this Sun, Uranus and Pluto triple conjunction, down in Virgo, and that could be somebody who has to really take it to the depths, which we all know Charlie has been a bit of a naughty boy, hasn't he? Gets up to all sorts of naughtiness. So yeah, just those charts I thought were interesting, and I liked the fact that Charlie Sheen also happened to have that connection that Ashton Kutcher did. Another person that's really good to look at is Chris Hemsworth. We don't have a birth time for him, but if you put his birth chart at noon, which I did when I wrote an article for Star Sign Style, he had Jupiter, Uranus rising in Sagittarius. I couldn't help feel that was the perfect Thor combination. And just somebody else who I wanted to mention that I didn't mention last week was Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has Mars rising, and I can't believe that I didn't pick Donald Trump to talk about, because he is just so Mars rising. He's Mars in the first house, Leo rising, and Mars in the late degrees of Leo. So, but anyway, you can look at Trump's chart as somebody who's quite a provocative and controversial Marmite person, somebody who divides opinion. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. It's a bit kind of getting a little bit away with myself. It's kind of long. And I'm sorry that it's a little bit late, but I hope you enjoy it. And I will be recording another show quite soon for you to listen to and enjoy. And by the way, if you're checking it out and you're enjoying it, please do a screenshot. Please tag me at Stellium Astro on Instagram. A few of you have been doing that, and I've been loving it. I love seeing that you're listening to the show. Honestly, after a week like I've had this week, where I've gone to the funeral, I've had a really tough time. Seeing things like that just absolutely brightened my day. So thank you for the emails. Thank you for tagging me on Instagram when you're listening. If you're enjoying what I'm doing, consider joining me on Patreon. I'm thinking about repricing slightly. But yeah, definitely get involved. And I put additional content out on Patreon that's exclusive for my Patreon community. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you next time about our other social planet, Saturn, who is kind of a buzzkill, but he's kind of important in astrology. So take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.